other kids were outside playing, riding the bikes up and down the street here, and I'm in my room listening to an album, old record album back when we had records of speeches by John F. Kennedy. And so, I didn't know it at the time. I was drawn to them. There was something about them, the poetry. I didn't as a kid have the words to describe what I was hearing, but the cadence and the rhythm, and was just drawn to that, and didn't know it at the time, but someday realized I could grow up and do that myself and write speeches for a president.
Welcome to Season 7 of the Creative Exchange Podcast, a production of the Arts Foundation of Cape Cod. In each episode, we spotlight the creative voices that shape our communities. We hope each conversation sparks a journey of discovery and inspiration. We'd like to thank our sponsors, William Ravis, the official realtor of the Arts Foundation, the Kelly Foundation, and the Cape Cod Foundation. We couldn't do it without your support. We'd like to thank Bank 5, Cape Cod 5, Cape and Islands Workforce Board, the Cooperative Bank of Cape Cod. Our words matter, something our next guest, Terry Szuplat, knows very well as a speechwriter for former President Barack Obama. I was so excited to sit down with Terry in his childhood home in East Falmouth. This is where Terry discovered his passion for writing, for politics, and for crafting speeches that have the power to make an indelible mark on people, on communities, and in our world. I spoke with Terry in advance of the launch of his first book, Say It Well, which hits stores on September 17th. In this episode, I not only talked with Terry about his experiences writing for President Obama, but learned some helpful tips that anyone can use to become a more effective communicator. I hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I did. I heard a rumor that you've actually run the road race.
Sure have.
Is that true?
In two ways. My summer job for quite a few years was I helped run the road race. I was one of the office workers at the Falmouth Road Race for several summers. That was my summer job. So I did a lot of behind-the-scenes work, and then started running it myself after that. So I've often run it a few times with my father and with our kids. So it's been a intergenerational thing.
I love that. Okay, what was easier, running the Falmouth Road Race or writing a speech for the president?
Yeah, with the race, you can stop if you get tired. You can just take a break, which I've done a few times because I'm not a runner by nature. It's just something I've done for fun to be out there with my dad and with our kids. With the speech for the president, you have to keep writing
Right.
because the finish line is not going to move. The president's going to walk out there and give a speech at the set time, whether you're ready or not. So
Right.
you have to be ready. There's no pulling off to the side and taking a break and grabbing a glass of water.
It's crazy. So let's dig into that. You're from Falmouth. Mm-hmm. Your family's from Falmouth. What was the motivation to become a speechwriter? I know that you just didn't go right into this. So tell me a little bit about growing up in Falmouth and getting involved in politics and through, the work of your family or...
Yeah, well, I've thought a lot about that. And, I think I'd always been interested in politics and government and history. And I think the difference for a lot of people is it's whether your family, your teachers, your community actually supports you in your interests, right? I think so many young people are interested in all sorts of things, but they don't necessarily have the support. They might be interested in music, but they don't have a piano at home or, so they never get to live out that passion. But I was very lucky that my parents and my teachers and my community really nurtured that and supported me. So yeah, we're sitting here in the living room in the home where I grew up in East Falmouth on Seacoast Shores in East Falmouth. And one of the things I remember early is that my mom gave me an album, a record of John F. Kennedy speeches. She knew I was interested in politics, and so. Other kids were outside playing, riding the bikes up and down the street here, and I'm in my room listening to an album, old record album back when we had records of speeches by John F. Kennedy. And so, I didn't know it at the time. I was drawn to them. There was something about them, the poetry. I didn't as a kid have the words to describe what I was hearing, but the cadence and the rhythm and was just drawn to that, and didn't know it at the time, but someday realized I could grow up and do that myself and write speeches for a president. But being here on the Cape, where the Kennedys are a constant presence, and having so much of that legacy and that myth and that legend and lore around you, I was drawn to politics and what it could be at its best. Politics can be messy and dirty and bring out the worst in people, but it can also bring out the best in people. And I love the idea that at their best, the speeches could appeal to something good and decent and the kind of country we ought to be. So again, my teachers, my family, was very active in student government at Falmouth High School. We have a town meeting model of student government so that we could learn how our actual town functioned. And I was our town moderator. When I tell people other parts of the country, they have no idea what that means. I just tell them I was student council president for a while. Here we know what that means. To be a town moderator to school, and we had a really fascinating program too. We had an incredible writing program at Falmouth High School that taught us how to not just write, but to read out loud our writing and to critique one another. We had what we called writing celebrations at the time, and really phenomenal writing program. And also, not only do we have a student newspaper, I was never on the student newspaper, but we had a student TV program. And so every week we would produce a program. And that's where I think, when I look back, I probably learned for the first time to write for the ear. So, writing speeches, being a speaker, you're not just writing for the page. You're writing for the ear. How does it sound? Does it flow? Does it have cadence? Does it have rhythm? And so being able to write a script in high school was just an incredible experience. So I just see a direct line between what I learned from the Falmouth school system to be able to prepare me to be a presidential speechwriter.
That's so interesting about, there is the legacy of the Kennedy family. There's a legacy of politics here on Cape Cod that is like no other. And so that's interesting that it really got into you. What was your access point to the White House? How did you get that job?
Yeah. So I think in a way it actually started in college. I went to college. I'm again fascinated by politics and wanted to be in Washington. You want to be an actor, you go to LA. You want to be in finance, you go to New York. Well, if you're interested in government and politics and history, you go to Washington, D.C. I went to American University, great school. And my senior year just got an incredible opportunity. I got to be an intern at the White House. And I was assigned to the speechwriters for the President of the United States, the foreign policy speechwriters. And, as an intern, most of the time you're just, you're grabbing you're grabbing coffee, you're getting books from the library. But they were so overwhelmed, sometimes they let me take a crack at something. And so when I was a junior in college, or senior in college rather, 21, 22 years old, I got to draft something for President of the United States. And I still have the schedule where it has my name on it. And again, I think they had to completely rewrite it. I wasn't very good. I didn't know what I was doing. I had no formal training. But well, what an incredible opportunity and honor to have to be able to help a president sort of communicate America to the world. And again, not as a Republican or a Democrat or an independent, but just as an American, to be able to help an American president communicate to the world. And I thought that would be a cool job. And a few years later, I got my first speechwriting job. I was a speechwriter for the Secretary of Defense, who was the former senator from Maine, Bill Cohen, who was a Republican who crossed the aisle to serve in the Democratic administration. So a lesson I learned early in life about how public service ought to work. Where we're not always we put our country before our party, and so that's how I did that for a few years and was on my way.
Tell me a little bit about, were there topics while you were in the White House, and I'm sure it was completely chaotic. I mean, I can't imagine it. It must be so competitive, lots of egos. How did you kind of manage or navigate? Are my assumptions correct?
I mean, it could be intense. I wouldn't say it was chaotic.
Okay.
Sometimes people say which was more realistic, West Wing or Veep.
Okay.
And so so I as in West Wing, they're always were walking through the hallways at a brisk pace, delivering the most eloquent soliloquies you can imagine about, the checks and balances and constitutionalism. And that's not how it is.
It's like perfection.
That is not what we do. We are running around, but it is a little bit more like Veep in the sense that it's just you find yourself in the most absurd situations. You're dealing with sort of impossible situations every day, and where the difference is that they're completely incompetent in Veep. Whereas I viewed as really sort of hardworking folks trying their best, but just in impossible circumstances. And just, 10 times a day, we were finding ourselves in these moments where like, is this really happening? Are we really dealing with this? Right. And, how you say, how do you deal with it? You just put your head down and do your job. I mean, in our case, it was, I was part of an incredible team of about a half a dozen writers. And our job was to write. Our job was to produce content for the President of the United States, to be able to review and change and make better. And so it really didn't, and this is probably true in all jobs, right? It's just if you get caught up in office politics and ego and who's up and who's down and who's feeling, then you can't do your job. Our job at the end of the day was to produce content. So the only thing I was going to be judged on was, did you produce the speech and did you produce it on time and was it a good piece of work? Mm-hmm. Nothing else mattered. So we had to stay focused.
That tells me there was good culture.
I think so. Yeah. I think there's theory in organizational management, right? That organizations take on the personality of the leader, right? If you have a toxic leader, you're going to have a toxic workplace. We were blessed to work for Barack Obama, and I always tell people whether you like him or dislike him, Republican, Democrat, I hope everyone has a boss like he does because he treated us with respect and decency every single day. And, I was privileged to work for him for almost the full 8 years. And never in my presence did he ever raise his voice, treat a staffer badly. If anything, he was, if he was disappointed in your draft or your speech didn't miss the mark, he didn't rip into you. He didn't tear you down. He didn't demoralize you. He said, let's make this better. How can we work to make this better? Which I've always appreciated because, as an employee, we had to go back and fix what we had done. And we had to make it better. So,
and he probably had that self-awareness where he knew the power of his words to you.
Correct. I think so. I hope so. As a person, as a father. I mean, he could have, again, whether your boss is the President of the United States or CEO, whatever, your words of your superiors matter. And so when, you get bad feedback, it can be crushing and then it's harder to do your job. So, I hope it never once hurt him raise his voice or snap at a staffer, and that made it. I wouldn't have been able to stay for as long as I did if I didn't work for someone like that.
Right. Were there things that you really enjoyed writing, and on the contrary, are there things that would come across your desk and you were like, oh, please don't make me write this?
Press conference statements after.
Tragedy.
An international economic summit was never, it was really hard to make those soaring. And none of those go into history books. But the ones that I love writing the most, and this was because I was mostly a foreign policy speechwriter. So I was fortunate to be able to go to over 40 countries with Barack Obama. So to be able to work on scripts and speeches with him where he could really connect with people all over the world was, I found, very, very fulfilling because, and I write about this in the book a lot. There might be little differences here in how Americans communicate and Europeans communicate, but when it comes to basic, I watched him communicate with people in Africa, in Asia, in Europe, and all over the world. And the same techniques worked because there's just fundamental ways that we connect with one another as human beings. And so that's so much of what the book is about, is how we can connect with another on just a human level. So I love being, to find out, hey, in a few weeks, we're going to go to India. How can Barack Obama or any person with their background connect with this country and these people? He's not Indian. He's not from India. He hasn't lived in India. So how do you connect with that group of people? So you look for the commonalities. You look for the things in life that are, that we share. So, and to be able to go have that experience where I'm going to learn how to try to find ways for this person to really connect with this audience. I love doing that.
So how, how would you find the commonalities in that? I mean, what's the first
Yeah.
step?
Well, I read about this book. I think this is something all of us can do. Again, whether we're traveling around the world and speaking to people, or whether we're speaking to someone on the other in a company or a state or an organization we don't belong to, or it's in the other side of town. You look for the things we share. So, right, so much of what we hear about in politics in the world today is about our disagreements and our divisions, and how you're different than I am, and politicians and cable pundits are constantly telling you that you're different from that other person, and they're a threat to you. I look for, as a writer, as a speechwriter, and as someone who coaches people, I encourage people to look for those commonalities, and they're usually not politics. It's food, it's history, it's pride in your sports teams and your pastimes. Um, so one of the things that Barack Obama would do when he would go overseas is, if he was out at a restaurant the night before, we'd find out what he ate. We'd find out or if he went to some cultural stop, we'd find out what he saw, what he talked about, uh, so that he could talk about the things that he experienced, the things that he should now, these common experiences that he had. And so, if you're living in Indonesia or India or Ethiopia, and all of a sudden the president of the United States gets up and starts talking about the food he tried, and that's the food you eat every night, all of a sudden there's a connection there.
Mm.
So one of the things I talk about in the book is that there's all these different ways that we as speakers can find connections with our audience, sports, food, history, that people, these are the things that bring us together, or just, being a parent, being a brother, being a veteran, being a person of faith. There's so many different ways you can connect with another person outside of politics that I think as
Mhm.
leaders and speakers, if we can get to, it's a great way to forge emotional connection with your audience.
I love that. And that makes total sense to me as also a professional person that has to do a lot of speaking. But tell me, what are some of the tricks that are in the area of kind of the like last minute? Like he's walked into a room, you don't know who's in the room really yet. What are some of the tricks or things that people can do when they're kind of caught off guard in
Some spontaneous
some
speaking.
spontaneous,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, well, yeah, we all find ourselves in situations where, hey, will you give a few minutes of remarks at this company meeting or at this luncheon that you're at, and you haven't
Yeah.
really prepared. Again, I think obviously in that case, there's no time to prepare. There's no time to prepare a script. I think one of the things I write about in the book is I think the most effective leaders and speakers are people who speak from their own experience, right? When you're not
Right.
just speaking in generic, abstract terms about a policy or an issue or something you care about. I think and the easiest way to do that is just to share stories about your own life, or to talk a little bit about yourself. And again, not to be a narcissist, because
Right.
but to just you can do that. You don't need a whole lot of preparation.
Mm-hmm.
You asked me at the beginning, tell me
Mm-hmm.
a little bit about what it's like growing up. Well, if you find yourself in a situation, you might share a story from your life that's relevant to that particular audience, why they might care.
Mm-hmm.
No one can take that from you. You might be the fifth speaker, but you never have to worry about someone stealing that story because it's unique to you. So the more you kind of draw on your own life experiences, your own stories, your own perspective, you're going to be unique. You're going to be
Mm-hmm.
different. You're going to be memorable.
Mm-hmm.
Those are the things that audiences remember.
That's so true. Um, I love your book, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
And there's a piece, I actually have it here that I'm going to read from, and I'd love to talk about how we all navigate these moments. From what I can tell, most people feel caught between the front lines, trapped in a rhetorical no man's land, not wanting to fall back on the coarse language of a cruel past, but unsure how to move forward without misstepping and setting off a linguistic landmine that can destroy their relationships, careers, or reputation. I feel, I mean, just to be totally honest, I feel I walk that line all the time.
Yeah, I think a lot of people do.
How do we give us a tip on that?
Yeah. So what I'm referring to there, I hope that will resonate with a lot of people, because I think we are in a point in history
Mm,
where we're rightly more aware than ever about how our language and our words can cause pain and harm to people.
Right.
And I think a lot of people say things without thinking, without realizing how it lands in someone who has a different life experience or comes from a different community. And so words and language and phrases that we've used forever that seem innocuous to us and cause deep pain. And so I think a lot of us don't want to do that.
Right.
On the other hand, some people don't seem to care,
Yeah.
and they'll just say it. But I think also too, sometimes there's a quickness on some people's part to condemn and to shame the family member who uses the wrong word. Our vocabulary and our language is changing very rapidly, I think, in the last few years, and rightly so. We're learning, our language is catching up with reality, that not everyone has the same experience. Not everyone's experience can be reduced to simple binary language. And so I think sometimes we don't always give enough grace to people who are trying to keep up, and so I think a lot of people feel trapped. And so I hear this a lot. It's like, I don't know what to say, and so they don't say anything. So one of the things I hope for in the book is that I kind of give folks some news. So a great example of that is when I think great speakers show gratitude and respect for our audiences. And so, maybe you've just been introduced by someone and their name is Parker and you want to thank Parker. Thank you, Parker, so much for what you're doing here at this work. Let's give a round of applause to Parker. He's doing an amazing job. Well, maybe Parker doesn't identify as a he. And you've just, in an effort to be respectful and to show gratitude, you've just inadvertently offended someone. And I think that's kind of the moment we're in. And so one of the things I talk about is why not take a few moments before the event just to make sure you're clear with how everyone identifies themselves. And I don't think that's not being woke. That's not being, radical. That's just showing gratitude and respect for people. And so I think, that's what I'm getting at with the passage that you read. And I think there are things that we can do. And also too, when there's a tendency, I think, of a lot of speakers, particularly men, when we're thanking and praising men, we praise them for their strength and their courage and their determination, all these words that evoke strength and masculinity, and then when we thank or pay tribute to a woman leader, we thank her for her passion and her empathy. And again, men and women don't have a monopoly on any of these virtues, but with our words, we sometimes inadvertently perpetuate all sorts of stereotypes and about different. So I think, part of what I talk about in the book from time to time is, how we can get ourselves out. If you are one of those people who feel like you're kind of trapped in this place and you're going to hit from any side, no matter what you say, well, then that's an opportunity for all of us just to think a little bit more deeply about what we're saying. And an opportunity, I hope, for people to give our parents and our grandparents and our colleagues a little bit of grace, who, if they stumble and, if they are struggling to keep up with some of the vocabulary and the language, that we use that as an opportunity, not so much to shame them, but to help bring them along and to a place where we're welcoming all people.
I totally agree. And I love what you said. It's really about being as prepared as you can, taking that moment. For a second, I thought your response was going to say, oh, you just go up to them and you say, I'm really sorry, which I'm so glad you didn't say.
You can do that too at the end.
You can
but
say,
you can
course.
Avoid the situation.
But you can avoid it.
Right.
By just taking a minute to be how would you like
to be identified?
Yeah, I love that. When you have a teenager in the house, it's also helpful.
Right.
These days.
And by the way, I purposely don't use words like left, right, liberal, conservative, because I don't like the way all of this always gets brought back to, left versus right. I mean, what we're talking about here is just basic human courtesy. There's a fellow human being who's hosting you, who's welcoming you to their organization, their group, their home, whatever.
Right.
It's just basic courtesy to take a second.
Yeah.
Kind of like when I thank you, can I say that, is it okay if I say he or she? It's a small little thing,
right.
But it's a perfect example of what I'm trying to get at, when these little things that we can do in our lives to bring people together and to show respect and dignity for each other.
Absolutely. I love that example. Okay, Terry, let's talk about Anxiety. So in your book, you reference, that you've coached famous people. I think it was in the introduction where you wrote about, they're like in movies naked and they can't do a speech.
Sure. Famous actors or
Famous
actresses
actors,
who
yeah.
have bared all on screen, but then they have to get up and speak to a group of people and they get anxious too.
Yeah, and it's always fascinating when you see a press conference and there's a famous person up there, they're being interviewed about a movie, and so many of them are so perfectly poised. So are you telling me that they're being coached? Or, so how are you coaching them through these like really intense moments of anxiety and pressure to be on?
Well, it depends on the person, right? Some of them are pretty relaxed up there. And I was referring to just various people that I've worked with where I'm
totally going to make make me who they are after.
they make you sign non-disclosure agreements.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So, but I mean, the reason I mentioned the book is I want people to know that even these highly accomplished people who are performers by nature at times struggle with this very human experience that we all have, which is having to get up in front of another group of people with your clothes on.
Right. Yes.
And
please.
it's still scary.
Right.
And I think if people realize, okay, well, even the best performers in the world sometimes struggle with this. And again, I think when I've worked with folks who've had this, I mean, I've worked with them because they want to be prepared. And I think that's one of the things, like, yeah, if you go up to a podium and you haven't thought about what you're going to say, and I offer thoughts in the book about how to think about what you want to say. You don't have a script or something prepared, written out, notes written down, then you're just sort of flying blind and you're out there on your own. And that's really scary. You have no net. But if you're prepared, if you've thought through, taken the time to think through what you want to say, written it down, thought it out, structured it out, that can take a lot of the anxiety out of it. Being prepared and knowing that you're prepared and knowing, it was one of the things that Barack Obama told me that I include in the book, is that, you might be anxious, you might not be able on your A game, but if you have it written down, you can just read your speech and you will be fine. Right. So but if you don't have that, then you're flailing.
Also the piece about your own story, you can remember your own story if you're not making it up. Right?
Ask anybody, tell me where you grew up. Tell me why you do the work you do. Tell me about your first job. And you walk anyone on the street, no preparation, just go up to someone and say, tell me where you're from. Tell me a little about you. We can all
we
do
can
this.
Remember that.
Right, because it's just true. It's authentic to who we are, and it requires no preparation. So that's another reason why, again, relying on the things that only, the chapter of the book is called Say What Only You Can Say,
Okay, let's get back to anxiety.
And trying to avoid that as it causes anxiety.
I really don't know a single person that doesn't struggle with public speaking. I mean, I have, over the course of my career, signed up for a communication class. And the very last class, I have to admit, I didn't show up.
Right.
And I have to do this.
You didn't have to do all that. You just had to buy the book.
I just had to buy the book instead of this, that class. But this is a span of years, right? So there's so many different things that, different books. There's I gave a TED Talk a couple of years ago, and that was probably the biggest. I had study buddies with me. I couldn't have done it without constant practice. Writing, rewriting, practicing in front of anyone that would listen to me. And some of the your book, it would have been super helpful ahead of time.
Sorry, I should have read it before.
2 years ago, it would have been, very helpful to use that, because it really ended up coming right down to the point of know myself, know my story. Why am I here? What am I trying to tell people? And the practicing millions of hours. I'm not kidding.
Right. No, absolutely.
To get it right for like a 5-minute presentation. But not everybody has thousands of hours
Right.
to practice. So how do we, and that overcame, was able to do it without a lot of anxiety. When I look back, I hear my voice crack a couple times,
Sure.
and a nervous giggle came out once, and why couldn't they edit that out? But, but what are some of the anxiety tricks that you have that that might be offered in, I know that there's a lot in the book, but what's a takeaway from that?
Yeah, one of the biggest things that I learned in this, and just listening to you speak right now, right? You recall the nervous laughter. Why can they edit it out? There's a fascinating study that was done, I think, in the UK a few years ago, where the researchers had folks give a speech, a presentation, filmed it, and then asked them about their anxiety, assess their anxiety level before, and then showed them a video of them speaking, which is, this is, none of us like to watch this. This is
No.
like a nightmare. Oh, and then they asked them how they thought they did. And an astonishing sort of 98, 99% of the people said, oh, wow, I did much better than I thought I did. And I put that in the book because I think that's sort of like a gift from the future, right? If you
Right.
know that you're probably going to be much better than you think, then I find that has helped me calm down a lot. That pause that you had in your speech that really, oh my God, I paused for like 15 seconds. It was so embarrassing. You go back and watch the video. Oh, it was like 2 seconds. It wasn't so bad. Or I lost my train of thought there, and I'm sure everyone thought I was an idiot and I was incoherent. You watch it and you go, oh, it was just, no one would have even noticed it.
Right.
We are our own harshest critics, and we are better than we think we are.
Right.
And I think knowing that you're going to be better than you think you are, that's one of the many techniques that I share in the book. I think another one is just channeling that anxiety that you have. So, you can, there's all sorts of things I talk about in the book about breathing and all these things that, maybe you can bring your heart rate down, maybe you can, but maybe you can't. And so maybe, an hour before you're still sweating and you're anxious and you're nervous and you can feel your heart racing. There's this wonderful psychologist out of Boston University that I interviewed for the book, Dr. Ellen Hendrickson, and she talks about how we can channel our anxieties. So, instead of, you can actually train to be anxious. So knowing that you're going to be anxious at the time of the speech, when you're practicing, go out and do a bunch of jumping jacks, jump on the treadmill, run, get your heart going, then practice or do a bunch of push-ups, whatever it is that gets your heart racing and gets you sweaty, and then practice your speech. So over time, your body and your brain will learn, oh, this is what it feels like to give a speech. You're basically training yourself to be comfortable with anxiety. I think this is an incredible technique that I've tried a few times, and it's actually worked, because then you get to the podium and your heart is racing. You're like, oh, this isn't scary and different. This is normal. I've practiced this a bunch of times. I know what it's like to speak with my heart racing. So you take this thing that's big and it's scary, and you kind of gain control over it. There's a fancy psychological term for it that I have in the book that it's escaping me right now because I'm not a psychologist.
You have to read the book.
But I find that it's incredible because, again, you may or may not be able to get rid of the anxiety, so you might as well channel. There's another thing,
I love that.
famous study that was done where folks were, one group was encouraged to say, I am nervous over and over again before they give a speech. And another group was told to say, I am excited over and over again before they give a speech. And then they ranked and rated their speech. Which group do you think gave a better speech? It was more the group that took their nervous anxiety and turn it into excitement, because it's the same physical experience.
Right.
So I've talked to folks who say, listen, those are all great techniques. None of them work for me. I still get up there and I'm shaking and I'm sweating. And I guess the last thing I tell people is, listen, if your hands are shaking and you're sweating and your mouth is getting dry, that's actually good, because that is your body doing exactly what it's supposed to be doing in the moment. You're a little scared.
You're healthy.
Your body is functioning properly, believe it or not. No, but I think, so a lot of it is just mind shifts, saying like, I may or may not be able to control these physical reactions that I'm having, but I can control the way I think about them. So that may not be able to stop my hand from shaking, but if I tell myself my hand shaking is normal, it doesn't freak you out as much.
Right.
And it works for me. It's worked for a lot of people. I think,
I love that. I'm going to totally try that. I have noticed over the years, it's really interesting. That piece about kind of doing some physical activities beforehand. I remember early in my career, I had a job where I had a boss that he would just be like, "Can you just, present on this?" Maybe he was having anxiety or something.
Sure.
I don't know. So I would always say, "Oh yeah, I'm going to do it. I'm going to die after I say."
Right.
Yeah. And I would go for a walk around the building a couple of times because I felt that I could get the nervous energy out of my body by just kind of like pounding it a little bit. So I find I so relate to that. I didn't realize that I was actually training my body to speak through the anxiety, which I think is really important. And that mindset of, I'm excited for this. I'm pumped up.
Right.
Because sometimes people get up and they say, I'm so nervous.
Right. You keep telling yourself, again, like that group in the study, imagine that. Yeah. I'm so nervous. I'm so nervous. I'm so nervous. And well, guess what? You're not, And another thing too, probably the most important thing is just, you're not going to be perfect. None of us are perfect.
We're human.
And we're human, and our audiences don't expect you to be perfect. And in fact, sometimes, the little errors we make are humanizing and builds empathy and connection with your audience, only makes them want to support you even more because they've been there too. And so, some speech coaches disagree about this, but like if your like hands are shaking wildly, it's called the illusion of transparency. Psychologists call it. It's like we think that the audience can see what we're feeling, so we think that they can see our anxiety.
They can't,
and they oftentimes they can't.
Right.
Sometimes they can. Listen, sometimes if your hands are shaking wildly,
right.
yes, you can. If you're sweating profusely, yes, they can see that. But most of the time, they can't.
Yeah,
I think there's a lot that we can do. Again, I think a lot of it is mindset.
It's mindset. Yeah. So I work with a lot of artists, a lot of arts leaders. One of the things that we coach our artists to do is, professional development through business planning, trying to figure out like how, where they want to go with their work. And it always comes down, two things. One is there's a big desire to spend time with other like-minded creative people. And so that's a plus. And then this kind of ties into it because you have, your peer group there. But to be able to talk about their work. And I get a lot of pushback. I just want to make the work. I don't want to talk about the work. And we all love the whole storytelling. Most people love to learn about where's this product from? Product meaning a piece of art, a song that was written, a book.
Like the story behind it.
The story behind it. So how do you, what are some ways to convince, artists that they're really important to our community and, we want to hear their stories?
Yeah, I think if you're trying to get your work out there, whether you're in business or art or whatever you do, you run a nonprofit at any level, community, country level, I think remembering that people don't just want the product. They don't just want the service, whether the product is a new phone or a painting that you've worked on. That's not the only reason people buy things and invest in things. They invest in things because they have a human emotional connection to something. They believe in the work. They believe in the person creating the product, the painting, the work of art. And so they can't know that story unless you share it. And I've seen this over and over. I mean, think about all of the, to your listeners, think of the causes that you've donated to. When do you donate? Why do you donate? Why do you buy one product but not another? It's often, part of it's the quality of the product, but oftentimes it's the person behind it. And they're investing in a person. They're investing in a story. They want to help that person, or they like the values of that person. So two competing products, and one works really hard to be environmentally sustainable. And that's important to me as a consumer, as a buyer of art or buyer of whatever. I might even pay a little bit more because that person, that artist, that creator reflects my values. And so, but the only way you can know these things is if the creator puts that story out there. So it's scary. I mean, I talk about that in the book. It's scary to put yourself out there, but that's what people respond to so often. And we know this in our own lives.
Right.
We know what, think of all the choices we make about the cars we buy, the clothes we buy, the things we drink, the foods we eat. When we go to a restaurant, it's not just because they have incredible food. It's because, oh my God, they're a refugee and they've come to this country and they've from nothing, they've built this, there's stories like this all over the country, but you can't, and that people will line up around the block, again, not just for the food, but because of the story and the cause and the person they're trying to support. Imagine if that person doesn't tell their story, then no one knows. So yeah, I think, again, I'll just say over and over and over that the most important thing we can do as leaders, as communicators, is humanize our work, bring ourselves to bear, and, being willing to share our stories so that other people can feel connected to us.
I love that. I have one last question for you. I thought of you in this interview the other day. I have a friend who's an actress. And she lives here on the Cape, and she's from LA. And we were with a group of a girls' night out, and we have another friend in the group who is an actual doctor. And we started talking about a symptom of something. Doesn't matter. And the actress friend said, guys, I played a doctor.
On TV. I know what I'm talking about.
I know what I'm talking about. I'm essentially a doctor, which the doctor started laughing. And, so.
My daughter has watched Grey's Anatomy for years.
She's a doctor.
Essentially a doctor. Dad.
She's essentially a doctor. Do you feel like, do you know what I'm going to ask you?
Please do not operate on me.
Do you feel, with all your experience writing speeches for President Obama, do you feel like you could be president?
No way. There's a reason that so many of us have chosen to be behind the scenes,
Yeah. Nobody wants that job.
No, it's you can't win. Before you open your mouth, half the country, thinks you're insane.
Right.
No, I mean, that's what relates to a question I get a lot. What is it like? People say, what's it like to hear your words spoken by a president? But that's not how we've ever thought about it, because so much of what we do as speechwriters is to capture the voice of the person. So I didn't start working for Barack Obama until 2009. He gave his big famous speech in Boston in 2004. So he had, I'm bad at math. What is that? That's like 5 years.
Yeah.
5 years of speeches and articles and interviews. So I would study all that. And it wasn't my job to come up with what I, Terry Szuplat, thought should be said in that moment. My job was like, if Barack Obama had the time to write this himself, what would he say?
Right.
That was my job. So they weren't my words. They were me just channeling his words and his ideas, his voice, his values, his vision for the country. And so, people, and the other question that this ties into is, what do you do when you didn't agree with the president? And it was actually really simple. It didn't matter. No one elected me. No one elected the staff to do anything. The president is the one who's elected. We're all there we're support staff. We've chosen to work for that person because we believe in what their vision for the country. And, none of us agree with 100% of any of our friends and family. I certainly didn't agree with 100% of everything Barack Obama did, but no one elected me to anything. So no, I don't. We were support staff. We were below stage, backstage. We're the ones doing the lights, getting the scripts ready. But there was only one person who had to go out there, and that's the other thing too, is that you say, you're putting words in their mouth. And again, no, all you could do is prepare a speech in collaboration with the president, so that it reflected their values and their voice. But there were times when the president would go out and just not use the script because it just wasn't feeling it. This is not what I want to say at this moment. So every leader, every CEO, president, all of us, we get to decide what comes out of our mouth, right? No one can put words in our mouth. No one can tell us what to say. Even if you have a team of speechwriters offering you up script, ultimately we get to choose what we say and how we use our words. And that's why I wrote the book, because, especially in this moment that we're in, you get to decide whether your words are going to, help calm a situation or inflame a situation. You're going to get your words to either hurt someone or help them. or you get to use your words to either divide people more, which we don't need, or words to bring people together, whether it's your families, your company, your community, your country. We get to decide that. So we all get to decide what we say and how we say it. And, my hope is that people read the book and
Yeah.
I guess say it well.
Right. Say It Well is the name of the book. And I am absolutely eating it up. I love how
Appreciate that.
every chapter ends with kind of, okay, this is essentially what I'm trying to tell you.
A recap, a
Which
to-do
I
list.
love.
Right.
I love the recap, the bullet list. It's really, really helpful. So I highly recommend it. The book is called Say It Well. And anything else you want to share?
Appreciate the great conversation.
Yeah,
Thank you so much. And to be able to do it in my,
Your
childhood home and where my folks are still at.
Well, I hope we covered everything you wanted to.
Absolutely.
And I really enjoyed this conversation. I feel like I could talk about this all day because it is so interesting. It's so interesting. Congratulations on this book. And
thank you so much.
I can't wait to see. I'm so happy that we got you kind of in the early end. So
This is exciting.
Yeah.
I hope to see where, again, I hope people find it useful. It's, it's not a memoir. It's not just stories about me. It's a workbook. It's a guidebook. It's a handbook that I hope people will take and mark up and dog ear and keep with them. And it's the kind of book that I hope, someone who runs a company or a nonprofit can find use in it, but then also share it with their kids because, young people need to, as you begin your career, as you begin life, you have to be an effective communicator. So I hope people feel it's a book for everybody.
It is. It is a book for everyone. And some of the stories and examples that you've given that we didn't even touch upon today that we could have, you should read the book to read more about it. But just some of the examples of historic moments in time that you were part of, that you helped people, give a clear speech or a message to move the needle on things. It's really important stuff. So I appreciate you being here. And
thank you so much. It's a great conversation.
Yeah, thank you. If you connect with this podcast, please subscribe, share, or leave a review. Thanks for listening.